All right, so I'm going to go ahead and write in dominant. That's dominant. And this one is recessive. And if you notice, I wrote the dominant allele with a capital T on purpose. We always write the dominant allele with a capital T because it helps us make sense in our brains that when we see them, we know that whatever this one is, the capital one, is going to be what's more dominant. And whatever that allele is, that's what we're going to see here. So here, we know that when we have them both together, it's going to be tall. And so we know that the tall allele is dominant. So I already knew that when I wrote this out. That's why I used a capital T to represent tall and a short t, a lowercase t, to represent short, because I knew that tall was dominant over short. So that's what we have here. So we've already discussed that what the plant actually is, what we physically see, is called the phenotype. So these are all phenotypes. These are all phenotypes on this side. But on this side, where we can see the actual genes, the actual alleles that the plant has, this is telling us the type of genes that they actually have. This is telling us the type of genes, or the genotype, that these plants actually have. So on this side, this shows the genotypes. So these are the genotypes. The genotypes are two letters that show us the alleles that a person have. So by looking at this genotype, we know that if this were a plant, we know that this plant has two tall alleles. And so we know that by looking at the genotype. We know that the phenotype will be that it's a tall plant because we looked at the genotype that has two tall alleles. The genotype of this plant is two lowercase t's. We know that the genotype is two short alleles. And we know that the genotype of this plant is a tall allele and a short allele together. So those are all genotypes on the left side there. And on the right side, we had the phenotypes, what we would actually see when we look at a plant. So when you look at this, you see that it's possible to have a tall plant that has two tall alleles, and we can have a tall plant that only has one tall allele and one short allele. So if we have a tall plant that has one tall allele and one short allele, we don't know just by looking at the plant, because these plants are both tall and they're the same height of tall. So this plant is not any shorter, it's not medium height, it's just tall, just like this one. They look the exact same. But it could have the recessive allele for short right there too. So having understood that, let's just go back over here, and using what we've talked about up here, let's fill in some information in our experiment. So this plant, we know that it has to have had two alleles. So it has to have had two alleles because it had a mother and a father. So the two alleles that this plant had were actually two tall alleles. Two tall alleles. And a shortcut to discuss these two tall alleles, instead of having to say that we have two dominant alleles or two tall alleles, there's another word from our list that we're going to use to talk about when we have two tall alleles. And that word is homozygous. Homozygous. Homo is a prefix meaning same. If you think of homosexuals, they like the same sex. So homozygous, the key part of that word there is homo, meaning same. All right, zygous has to do with genes. So homo means same. And so homozygous is when you have a genotype. It's when you have a genotype where both letters are the same, or where you have both of the same alleles. Both of the same alleles. So here, this would be a homozygous genotype because both alleles are the same. They're both tall. Right? Both of these are tall. Okay, and here, this would be a homozygous genotype as well because both of these are the same. Two short alleles. So it's homozygous. All right, now this has one of each allele. It has a tall allele and a short allele. A tall version and a short version. So because these are different alleles, we have the word heterozygous to refer to something, a genotype that has two different alleles. The prefix hetero means different or opposite. And so heterosexuals like the opposite sex. So when you see hetero, think different. Homo, think same. Hetero, different. Homo, same. Okay? So over here, what would be the genotype of this? Would this be homozygous or heterozygous? All right, this is homozygous. And are these dominant alleles or recessive alleles? Dominant, because they're capital letters. So we would call this homozygous dominant. Is this one homozygous or heterozygous? Correct. This is also homozygous because they're the same alleles. Now, is this homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive? Correct. This is homozygous recessive because these are both recessive alleles. So you have homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, and then here we have two different alleles. So what would that be? That would be heterozygous because hetero means different. So this is heterozygous allele. And we would never say heterozygous dominant or heterozygous recessive because there's only one way for it to be heterozygous. And that means that you have two different alleles. All right, so here we have two dominant alleles. And so this would be called homozygous dominant. So this short plant, what would be the genotype of this short plant based off of this? What would be the genotype of this short plant? There's only one possibility, and that is two short alleles. So two short alleles mean that we would call this what? Homozygous or heterozygous? This would be homozygous recessive. All right? So these two plants were reproduced with each other. And so this plant ended up giving T to all of its offspring. And I would draw a T from here, but it'll make it messy. So just imagine that some of these arrows are coming from the other T, this other T right here. Okay, so this is where the dominant allele went. Whenever these two plants were reproduced with each other, the offspring got a tall allele from this plant. All right, so I'm going to write that down here. All right, now I'm going to put this in green just so that it's a little bit easier to see visually. So we got the homozygous recessive here, and now when they reproduce, this one gave one allele to each offspring, and this plant is also going to give one allele to each offspring. Because remember, mom and dad each give half of their DNA to you, the offspring, or to the plants, the offspring. So now we're going to have the short allele here. So all of these offspring ended up getting one tall allele and one short allele. One tall allele, one short allele. So all these offspring would be called what? What word would we use from this list to refer to all of the offspring? It would be heterozygous, because each of these offspring's genotype has two different alleles. One short, one tall. One dominant, one recessive. So these are all heterozygous. And we need to go to the next video because I'm running out of time.